Hello, everyone. I'm Allison Hudgins. I'm the Public Services Manager at the Georgia Archives. I'm really glad to have this opportunity to talk to y'all today about creating exhibits. I'll give you a little bit of background about the Georgia Archives. We are the permanent repository for state government records. We've got about 70,000 cubic feet of permanent records here at the Georgia Archives. We also have a record center located out in Austell that holds about 180,000 cubic feet of non-permanent records. We have public service programs here at the Georgia Archives. We have big events about 4 times a year where we have generally about 100 folks coming in to view speaker presentations. A lot of it is genealogy focused, but we do have an academic historical symposium in April every year. Talk a little bit about exhibits. I've been working on exhibits here at the Georgia Archive since about 2015. Now, most of those are physical exhibits that we have here using our original records, but we did develop an online, sort of an online exhibit platform that's like a slideshow a couple of years ago, and we do have those on our website now, and that's georgiaarchives.org. They're great. They do take a lot of time to put together, so we don't have quite as many up as we would like. They're time consuming to create, but we do have a couple up there. The idea is we want to showcase the records at the Georgia Archives and make that available to as many people as possible. And we want to explore topics that our collection has, records for, is strong in. And we want to encourage people to, dive deeper into the records and use them for their own research projects. So I'll go over briefly some of the topics that we're going to be discussing today. We'll talk about the parts that make up an exhibit, strategies that you can use when selecting a topic, search tools that you can use to find amazing items in the collection, tips for writing for exhibits. A lot of that will be, standard writing advice, but we'll go over a couple of concerns that are unique to writing for exhibits. We'll look at some multimedia options that you can use, how to use statistics in your exhibits and where to find statistics, copyright, ideas for documenting your project, and some of the accessibility barriers that users can encounter on the web and how to design inclusively. And we'll also talk a little bit about responsive web design and resolution and screen sizes. Okay, so let's go over some of the basic elements that you'll find in most exhibits. The example that I've got here is a portion of an online exhibit that we created here at the Georgia Archives on World War I soldiers from Georgia. Now, the first item, marked as number 1, is the reproduction of the original document that I'm highlighting. In this case, it's a letter that a soldier wrote to his mother after being wounded. Item selection is, highly subjective, but generally you want to look for items that are interesting, easy to interpret, and if they aren't, easy to read, you could provide a transcript, which is what we did down here. It's always a good idea to try to find items with some kind of color in them or visual interest when possible. It's, not always possible, but, you want to include something that's interesting to the viewer throughout the exhibit. The second item is a description of the item that you've chosen to highlight. You want to identify this item briefly and include the date that it was created. This descriptive text should be fairly short. You want to aim for about 50 to 75 words. That's sort of a good goal. Now, I won't say that I've never gone over that, but if you have a lot of text, you're just tempting people to skip over it. Now, the third item here, this is the explanatory text. In a physical exhibit, this would probably be on like a wall panel as you enter a section of the exhibit. The explanatory text gives you context or sets up the viewer to better understand what they're looking at. Now, this text can be longer. Generally, you don't want to go over about a few paragraphs, though, because again, people just aren't going to read a huge block of text. Now, the fourth item is a citation for the original item. This is very important and it should always appear with the item. The citation should include enough information for somebody to be able to find that original item again. Now, a citation could include the institution's name where the collection's held, if that's not just obvious, um, the collection and the series name where the item came from. You may also want to include a folder title or an image number. This is especially useful when a collection or a series is large. Now, in this case, all of the items in this exhibit are from the Georgia Archives, so we didn't include that because it's just set up. These are, all Georgia Archives records. The citation includes the collection name, which is the Robert Burton collection. And then after the collection name, let's see. So here's the collection name. After the collection name, you've got the accession number. Now this accession number is what we use to identify non-government collections. And on the next slide, we'll take a look at the collection's inventory and make sure that we have enough information to get back to this letter. Okay, so here's the collection inventory for the Burton collection. You'll see the accession number listed here at the top. In this inventory, we see that the letters are arranged in chronological order. The letter from the exhibit that we were looking at was dated August 2nd, 1918. And we see that box 2 includes letters from May to November 1918. Now, this inventory happens to go into item level description. This letter is described in detail in the inventory. You see there in the corner there, the full description of the letter. This description was provided by the donor. Most of the collections in our holdings are not described to the item level. But even without this item level description, you would still be able to find this letter because the box list tells you, which dates are covered by box 2. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about identifying a topic for your exhibit. You may be tasked with choosing an exhibit topic or a topic, may be decided for you. Maybe there's some event that you're promoting or it's an anniversary of the organization's founding. Either way, you'll want to think about who will be viewing the exhibit and tailor the exhibit to them and their interest. If you have the freedom to choose a topic, aim for subjects that you know your repository specializes in. And that way you've got plenty of quality material to choose from. It's always going to help if you're familiar with your collections or at least have done a preliminary check of what might be available. You'll also need to understand the limits of your collection. So for example, here at the Georgia Archives, the majority of our holdings are state agency records. Because of this, we're limited on the scope of what types of subjects that we would be able to do exhibits on, or at least it would be trickier to do things on. For example, we'll probably never do an exhibit on federal court cases. We don't have the case files for federal courts because these are held by the National Archives. We wouldn't do an exhibit on early film history in America. We just don't have the collections to support this kind of exhibit. You may also find that even if you have plenty of documents on a subject, you may not have any photographs or film. Now, this is unavoidable in a lot of cases, like if you were doing an exhibit on the War of 1812, but you probably want to aim for topics that you have some visual materials for. Now, this could be paintings, colorful publications, etchings, or what we use a lot, maps. We've got a huge map collection here. And you also want to think through the resources that you have. You'll have a harder time telling a complicated story that requires a lot of research if you have to have it done, next week. You might need to pick something a little more practical, or just tell a portion of a complicated story and then give your viewers some resources if they want to learn more. If your topic has published scholarly sources, and this could include books or published journal articles, this will make your life a lot easier. We'll talk about how in a little bit. So we'll go over some search strategies. You may already be familiar with a lot of this, but I wanted to go over some of the strategies that I use when searching the collection here at the Georgia Archives. So first off, I will check secondary sources. And again, this is going to be things like scholarly books or academic journal articles. I use the Georgia Historical Quarterly a lot, for example. Hopefully your source can give you more context for the subject. And additionally, what I'll do is I'll check to see if they have used any of the collections at the Georgia Archives. I'll check their cited sources. As I'm familiarizing myself with the topic, I'll keep an eye out for individuals or organizations that play like a major role. Then I can see that if we have any materials on those individuals or organizations. And if I've, selected a topic, that's tied in with our holdings, then that's going to increase the chances that I can find something. I'll also think about how this topic may have been affected by any state agencies. And if so, I'll look through the agency's records to see if I can find anything on my topic. So modern citations can be very good, as archivists have processed collections and provided authors with collection and series names and specific record group numbers. Those will show up in the cited sources. You can see an example of this here. This is a book that was published in 2015, and they've gone into very good detail and included full series names and the record group numbers. Now, because the Georgia Archives has been around for about 100 years, I often run into historical citations like this one here. This is Georgia Historical Quarterly. This is an article that was published in 1928. Now, in 1928, the collections at the Georgia Archives were not described by modern established professional archival standards. There were no record groups, there were no series. So this citation, which is to be found in the State Department of Archives, while it's not very specific, the author really didn't have much else that they could cite. Now, if me and my colleagues were asked to locate the letter that's cited in this article, we're familiar enough with the holdings that we can narrow it down to about 2 collections that it's likely to be in. One note, you may need to tailor some of these strategies for your institution. The Georgia Archives has a huge collection that's been accessible to researchers for about 100 years. You may be working with a much smaller collection without a lot of scholarly work citing your collections, but you can still look for publications that give you a broad context for your topic. And one advantage of a small collection is that you can realistically get to know it a lot better. If you know the collection, then you know how to access it without having to rely on academic publications. Now, if you are expanding your search to other repositories, besides your own, there are a few strategies that you can use to help you find what you're looking for. If you're in Georgia, use the Georgia Archives Historical Organizations Directory. This is on our website. If you go to georgiaarchives.org, scroll down to the bottom under the featured content section, and you'll see a link to this directory. You can do searches by location or by keywords, and you'll get contact information and also a brief description of what the repository specializes in. You can also do just sort of broad internet searches for so-and-so's papers or the organization's name records. I've got a few examples on this slide, one from our collection and one from the Atlanta History Center. This is the William C. Polly papers at the Atlanta History Center and the Georgia Legislative Black Caucus records that are here. So, organization name records or, personal name papers. And by the way, you might notice that these two have the same kind of web design. Even though they're from different organizations, these are finding aids that were created using ArchiveSpace, which is, very widely used. You may already be familiar with it. You can also use sites that compile collections or publications into one database. For example, you can use Archives Grid, which is a sort of collection of archival collections, or WorldCat, which is a database to look up books and publications at libraries. And I've got both of those linked in the slide. And I wanted to give you another example of how I'll find things in our collection. A few years ago, we were doing an exhibit on textile mills in Georgia, and I was looking for records. We did have some private collections of, mill time books and some architectural records of mills and mill housing. Um, and remember, most of our collection is state government records. Um, so if I wanted to find more things, especially if something that documented individual mill workers, I had to sort of think a little more creatively. Um, So I reasoned that large mills might be sued, especially given some of the poor working conditions. So I started looking in the Georgia Supreme Court case database, and I noticed some cases involving mills from the time period that we were interested in. So I read the Georgia reports, and these are short summaries of court cases that go to the state Supreme Court. And I selected a case that sounded interesting, was not overly legally complex. This case involved a mill worker who was injured by a piece of machinery, and you'll see that this is the case here, and you'll see some testimony that was included in the Georgia Supreme Court case file. Um, Now, another strategy that I used for the same exhibit was I checked for large events that involved mills that state agencies might have gotten involved with, especially the governor, because we have a good collection of governor's correspondence. So I checked newspapers for any kind of large events, strikes, disasters, passing new laws that would affect mills. And I found a multi-state textile mill strike in 1934, and information that the Georgia governor at that time, Eugene Talmadge, imposed martial law at a textile mill. So I went and checked the governor's correspondence from the fall of 1934 when this strike was happening, and I found a folder labeled military, and that's where I found this letter, this one here. I won't read it out, but I encourage y'all to pause the recording and read through these documents. Okay, so a lot of these writing tips that I'll be giving are just sort of general, but I've tried to tailor them to exhibits best I can. You want to get your points across as efficiently and effectively as you can. Don't use 20 words when 10 would have done. People won't read everything that you write, and the more text you write, the more that you tempt them to just skip it over. Make sure that you're using clear, easily understood language. You want to convey information at the end of the day, and clear, understandable language with no archives jargon is going to help you do that. Plus, then you make your content accessible to a much wider age range and audience. Try to tell a story when you can, and try to let the documents do most of the telling rather than your text. It's the whole, show don't tell advice. Although admittedly, sometimes you just need to do some telling. And these are guidelines. You can judge which ones work for you and which ones don't. One thing you should do is explain anything that won't make sense to a modern audience. For example, this 1805 land survey shows the path of storm destruction. On the survey, they have this labeled Traces of Hurricane of April 5th, 1804. Now, the survey was made in middle Georgia. It's far inland, away from the coast, and it shows the path of the storm running in like one wobbly line of destruction. To me, this is starting to sound a lot more like a tornado than a hurricane. Well, come to find out, during that time, the terms hurricane and tornado were both used interchangeably to describe tornadoes. So a modern audience won't know this. And when we presented this, in one of our land exhibits, we made sure to explain this to folks. So let's talk a little bit about multimedia that you can use in your online exhibits. This is an advantage of online exhibits over physical exhibits because you don't have to try to find technology to display multimedia in a physical space. The disadvantages are that some of this multimedia technology that you may be incorporating, it may become outdated, and it could ultimately break your exhibit. Years ago, you had tons of websites using Flash Media Player to animate portions of their site. Well, Flash was discontinued in 2017, and all that Flash content had to be replaced or, it just became inaccessible. You'll have to think about the lifespan of your exhibit, especially since most online exhibits are put up with the expectation that they'll remain on the site permanently. Now, websites are not eternal, and they're going to be redesigned at least every 10 years or so. And old content does break or just needs updating. So don't count on an exhibit staying up online indefinitely. Now let's take a look at some of the examples of media that you can use in your exhibits. This is the timeline that we prepared for an exhibit on the Georgia Highway Department back in about 2016. This is sort of just a simple image that we used for a panel. We combined photographs that we had in the holdings with little blurbs about significant events in the history of transportation. Your timeline could be interactive. It can include not only pictures, but video or audio clips. Okay, we're going to switch things up and look at some exhibits that are out there in the wild. This exhibit was created by Yale University Library using a platform called Omeka. This is an open source platform. I haven't worked with it, but it is popular, and you'll find a lot of institutions are using it for making their online exhibits. I'm going to play a little video showing how it works. And by the way, if you'd like to view any of the exhibits that I show you today, I've included a link at the top. Okay, so you see there's a menu on the left that you can sort of navigate with. They've got little blurbs where you've got text that you can put in. You click on the images, you get sort of a detailed viewer where you can go in and view it in more detail. And then you've got record metadata above. And they've got sort of a little slideshow feature. And they can intersperse the images with the text. Okay, another way that you can present an online exhibit is basically giving a virtual walkthrough of a physical exhibit. I really like this method because it makes physical exhibits more accessible to folks who aren't able to visit in person. This type of exhibit uses sort of a Google Street View type technology that allows users to walk through a virtual space. In this example, we'll look at an exhibit created by the City of Raleigh using a platform called Matterport. So this is the city's website, and you just click the link, and it pulls you into this little virtual space that you can walk around in. You can pan around and look at the space, and then click on the little circles to walk. And then the panels have these little menus that pop up. You can read them in detail. And it does have zoom features, so you can view things more in more detail. Another popular platform is Story Maps. This site allows users to create exhibits combining maps and other multimedia. We'll take a look at this one created by the Esri Story Maps team. I really like this one because you've got that little bug that walks across every once in a while. And as you scroll through, these actions are being triggered where the maps change. Um, okay. So let's switch gears. We'll talk about your exhibit's content, specifically statistics. I like including statistics in exhibits because it's a quick way to get across a fair amount of information. It also gives people better context for the documents and images that they're seeing. So where do you find historical statistical data? Broadly, you can use data from the US Census Bureau, which captures a huge amount of information about the American population over a wide time span. I also use state agency annual reports, which are packed with statistics. Up here at the top, this is a 1900 census bulletin. Um, they've got, census bulletins are massive documents that the Census Bureau prepared by compiling basically the door-to-door census data, and then put it into statistical tables that they then made available on their website. Below that, we've got an image from an annual report of the Prison Commission in Georgia from 1904 to 1905. And again, those state agency annual reports are just packed with statistical data. You may also want to use reports from your organization or, more broadly from just academic studies on your topic. Now, when using statistics in exhibit, it's often a good idea to present them visually. Not only is it an opportunity to inject some visuals into a document-heavy exhibit, it's a good way to communicate to visual learners um, and convey sometimes dense information in a clear way. This is a panel from an exhibit that we did a few years ago on education during segregation in Georgia. I used the Department of Education annual reports for this and local superintendent's annual reports to compile this data. So at the top left here, you'll see the original statistical table that was published in the Department of Education's annual report from 1910. Once I had this information, I went into Microsoft Word and went to Insert Chart. I entered the data into a table, basically a little mini Excel table. And then from there, Word will create a chart from that data. You've got some options about different colors and fonts that you can use, which labels to show, so you can customize it a good bit. If you've taken a statistics class, you may have run into causation and correlation. What that means is that you can't make a claim that one thing causes another just because they appear to be linked in some way without doing a scientific experiment where you've selected participants randomly and you've got a control group. I've pulled out a quote about this from an article in the Harvard Business Review, and I'll read a little bit of it. Consider a recent health study that set out to understand whether taking baths can reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. The analysis found that people who took baths regularly were less likely to have cardiovascular disease or strokes. They go on to say, without doing a controlled experiment, it's hard to know if just taking baths what really reduced heart disease. For example, it's possible that regular bath takers are generally less stressed and have more free time to relax, which could be the real reason that they have lower rates of heart disease. Still, these findings were widely circulated with headlines like, taking a bath isn't just relaxing, it could also be good for your heart. So let's take a look at an example of this in an exhibit. This is a chart that we used in an exhibit at the Georgia Archives on the history of education in Georgia. It shows rates of illiteracy in Georgia dropping dramatically from 1880 through 1920. These statistics, by the way, came from US Census Bureau bulletins. Now, to give a little historical context, the Department of Education was founded in Georgia in 1870, and as a result, many more children then had access to free public schooling. Now, I didn't want to claim that the introduction of public education was solely, you know, the cause of what caused illiteracy rates to decline. It was probably a large factor. It may have even been the largest factor, but there were other things happening during this time that likely had an effect on literacy rates. For example, you had more professional teaching programs available at Georgia colleges. You had Payne College in Augusta that was established in 1884. This was a college for African American students with a focus on teaching and religious studies. You had Georgia College in Milledgeville. This was established in 1889. At that time, it was a college for white women, and teaching was one of the main areas of study. You also had Spelman College in Atlanta. This is a historically black college for women, which added a teaching program in 1891. Now, besides just having more qualified teachers, you also had the introduction of child labor laws. At the state level, you had a major set of these laws passed in 1906, 1914, and 1916. I think the main takeaway from this is that history and the world is complicated, and unless you've done the work, you generally don't want you want to avoid attributing one single cause to an outcome. Okay, so once you've found some items that you want to use, you'll need to check and make sure that you have the rights to publish copies of these items on your website. When using items in your collection, this is fairly straightforward. You'd need to go check the donor agreements and ensure that the rights to the collection were transferred to your repository. If you are unsure of the copyright status of an item, ideally you would get help from a copyright expert. There may be a legal department in your agency or organization, but there are also resources on Stanford's copyright page, and you can also check copyright.gov. These are linked in the slide. While exhibits are going to consist mostly of your own collection items, if you find a situation where you need to request a copy of an image or document from another repository, you need to request permission to use from that repository. They may have conditions that you may need to meet. For example, you're going to need to cite that the material comes from their repository, which you should be doing anyway. And they may charge you a use fee. Use fees are often assessed either as a nonprofit rate or as a for-profit rate. When requesting permission, it's probably a good idea if you go ahead and identify your repository and the type of use that you're requesting. Another thing you can do if you're looking for images that to illustrate your exhibit from outside your collection, check repositories that have large sets of items that are not likely to be in copyright. This includes Library of Congress and National Archives. I've listed a few other repositories on this slide as well. Anything that you find, you should always check the rights on that individual item because there could be restrictions. Now, as you're creating your exhibit, I would highly recommend having a document or a spreadsheet that you use to track the items that you've selected. Patrons may want to track down a specific item that they saw in an exhibit. You may need to find the item, for a presentation or a tour. And you need a way to track the scans that were created. Otherwise, you or other staff may be going back and scanning an original that has already been scanned, and this increases risk or stress on that original. The spreadsheet that you're seeing on the left is one that we use for a physical exhibit here at the Georgia Archives, which is why it has a conservation notes section commenting on the physical condition of the item. It also includes a column for the record number, which is what we need in order to access the physical item in our space management system. And then I've also included an item description. Going into this amount of detail lets me search across this spreadsheet and then find the item that I want. I also save copies of the label text that we use in the exhibits, and this text has also been really helpful when I'm trying to track something down that we've used in the past. When designing your online exhibit, keep accessibility in mind. You want to make this information available to as many people as possible. I've noted some of the web accessibility barriers listed on the ADA guidance page. I've also got a link to the full guidance page on this slide. Some of these are design choices that you can make in most platforms. For example, making sure that there's enough contrast between the color of the text and the color of the background. Um, if you're trying to implement accessibility features but you're running into problems, you can talk to your colleagues, IT department if you have one, or you can always put a question on a listserv like SGA, which is the Society of Georgia Archivists. Make sure to also check any institutional policies that your organization may have on accessibility, and make sure that you're complying with that policy. When considering a platform to use for your exhibits, check for built-in accessibility features. Your exhibit is going to be viewed on a variety of devices with a variety of screen sizes. Ideally, the platform that you choose will have responsive design. What that means is that your website automatically recognizes a viewer's screen size and adjusts content to fit on that screen and to be readable. You see here an example of the Georgia Archives website, how it looks on a desktop computer versus how it looks on a phone. Below that, I've listed some common screen sizes, but just know that these are only common right now. Tech changes rapidly. The screen sizes that we were using 20 years ago are not the screen sizes that we use now. Ideally, you don't want to design for one specific screen size. When selecting your exhibit platform, check to make sure that it has built-in responsive design. And as you create your exhibit, test it out on a variety of devices if possible, and see so that you can see what your viewers are seeing. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about image formats and resolution. Now, some of this y'all may be familiar with, but I want to go over some of the basics. You've got a couple of different image formats listed here. I've got TIFFs, PNGs, and JPEGs listed. There are differences, and I've listed sort of the broad strokes, the differences between these formats on the slide. One of the big differences is the type of compression that each format uses. This compression method determines if the format will degrade over time. PNG and TIFFs have a type of compression that means that they don't lose data over time. This is called lossless. JPEGs, on the other hand, will degrade over time. This is why you do not want your master copy of a file to be a JPEG. You want to use a TIFF format for that. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about resolution. On the right here, you'll see a scanned image from a civil defense booklet from 1957. This scan was created for the web. It's meant to be viewed at about the size that you see here in the upper right corner. Now, if you zoom in, you'll see that this image is not very sharp. The image, by the way, is a JPEG. You can see the pixel dimensions and the resolution listed at the bottom right corner. Now, this is a perfectly good file for viewing on the web. It'll load fast. It's not going to take up a lot of space on your server, but it's not suitable for printing, and it's not suitable as a master copy of this scan. Now, along the bottom here is a page from a civil defense publication that we scanned in order to print a reproduction of this page for a physical exhibit. We scanned this item at 300 dpi, and this is a TIFF file. When we zoom in to 280%, the image is still sharp. This is a good file for printing, and it's also good as use for a master copy of this scan, but you would not want to use it on the web. It's a big file. It's 25 MB. So it would take up a lot of room on the server, and it would load slowly for the viewer. Now you may see resolutions listed as either PPI or DPI. PPI means points per inch. This is used for screens, and DPI is used for printing. It's dots per inch. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. I hope I've given you guys some ideas and some information that'll help you create your own online exhibits. Been really happy to have this opportunity to talk to everybody about this topic. It's something that I really enjoy talking about, and I really enjoy creating exhibits. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.